Quite a day, it turns out.
Quite a day. We'll talk about Justin Welby in a minute. We'll talk about Sadiq Khan and Project Gladys. But let's start with, I really wanted to get an idea. You'll have been around Westminster. The assisted dying bill introduced by Kim Leadbeater. Heard a lot about it. I think it's one of those subjects that you're going to have personal opinions on. I talked about my parents both becoming shells, nappies, being spoon-fed. I didn't want that, but I also understand that any sort of rule like that, safeguarding is really important because it could be abused. What I do want to raise with you as an MP in the House is that this is a private member's bill, which means there's only 5 hours to debate this. Surely
that's the first bit of a misinformation.
OK, good.
That is deliberately being put out there by those who are against this bill. Look, it's a very important, sensitive, emotional issue for both sides of the debate. From our perspective at Reform, it's a matter of personal conscience. We will no doubt vote differently according to personal conscience on it. I'm very clear where I am and have always been since a very dear friend of mine died at far too young an age in absolute agony of a cancer that no drugs would touch the side of in terms of pain relief. And that seared on my memory. So, you know, I've always had a view that if we as supposedly a top international country with the most respected legal system in the world, if we can't design a system that when you are terminally ill, and it's not assisted dying, it's when you are terminally ill, so it's in the last 6 months or expected of your life, if you're terminally ill, if you're of sound mind, and you say this is what I'd like to do, and it's signed off by not one but 2 independent doctors, then it goes to the High Court to be signed off by a judge, and so there's massive safeguards and protections in place. And my view is that I think we should be brave enough to try it. It is a private member's bill, and it's going to be debated for one day at what's called the second reading. It's then going to go into committee stage. It's then going to go to the House of Lords. It's then going to come back to the House of Commons. It'll take 6 to 9 months of debate. So that's the first misinformation. And it's for someone who is terminally ill. So it's not.
So this is what I want to take with you, because I started the show and it was really interesting. I'd said about my mum and dad, and listen, I'm just being honest with you, as we should do this story. 87 years of age, she's sitting there, she can't speak, she's had a stroke, she's got dementia. And for 11 weeks, she sat there dribbling, playing with it, and then had a heart attack and died. And I was happy. That sounds a terrible thing to say. It's a dignified lady. A lady whose body had given up and whose brain had given up. Don't want to see that. Same with the old man. The problem is, and I started today thinking, right, so when you're of sound mind and body, surely you should be able to maybe sign something legally and say, this is what I want. You hear that story. We had a woman on earlier who said, what my mother went through, right? You wouldn't, we would have been taken to court if that was an animal, but I wasn't allowed to do anything, and I tell my sons, my point is, are you of sound mind and body with 6 months to go when you're on that high drugs and you've got a terminal illness? I'm not, I'm on your side, by the way. I'm trying to look at both sides.
Actually, someone with Alzheimer's or dementia wouldn't be able to take advantage of this bill or act if it went through, because the key point is that only you can then, in a sense, apply the substance.
It shouldn't be relatives or any family members, because that then opens the gates.
And this is based on the practice that's been used and the safeguards and the regulations in the state of Oregon in the US since 1997. Very similar safeguards, and if you sort of look at the numbers, about 0.4% of people who die every year are essentially use this process. So that's the rough rule of thumb. So and over, I mean, I've checked it in Oregon. You know, it hasn't been used and abused. There aren't hundreds of articles of absolute scandals. So, you know, there's the safeguards, and I think sometimes we've got to be prepared to try things, and this bill has a review, a formal review, after 5 years, and it can be debated by MPs, and some MPs will go in with an open mind and say, well, I'll vote for it through, but I want it amended to say the review needs to be after 1 year or 3 years, or there's a whole range of things.
What's the feeling in the House? Do you think it's a sort of bill that will get through?
I think actually it's going to be really, really close, and it'll depend who turns up on the day. And there is quite an important issue, which is that although this only applies in England and Wales, it appears that MPs from Scotland and Northern Ireland are going to come down or stay in London and vote on it, even though it doesn't apply in those devolved nations. And that's quite an interesting point in itself. And for some, they're doing it for religious reasons. And whilst I respect that, I do have a serious question mark to say, well, I don't think that's actually fair, because it doesn't apply in your devolved nation. It's a devolved matter. And therefore, really and truly, I just think morally you shouldn't vote on it. There's a counter-argument to that, which is, well, someone from Northern Ireland could come to England, but you would have to live under the rules. You'd have to live in England for 12 months.
You would,
so there's a whole bunch of stuff around it. It is a very personal thing. Obviously, MPs are getting lots of letters and emails in the mailbags.
You're getting lots from
I'm getting lots from Boston and Skegness constituents, and it is very much in favour.
Is it?
It is in favour. And I get, very well articulated letters against, and I fully respect that. And let's see what happens. I think.
And do you, as an MP, help me out here? This is really interesting, actually, because this is such an emotive issue. There isn't you vote for this party that's a three-line whip. It's going to be an individual vote. You're a new MP. You get a flavour from your constituents. If the flavour or the majority of the view is against your personal view, how do you vote, Richard Tice?
And that's a really, really good question. And I would have to listen very, very carefully to that, because this is a matter of personal conscience. And so you'd look at that very carefully.
But you're representing the people.
Exactly. You're representing that. And you are sent to Westminster to make difficult judgments on behalf of constituents. And in a sense, thank heavens everybody doesn't agree. Life would be so boring if you did. And
God, can you imagine?
You wouldn't have a job here, Jeremy.
No, I might end up like you. You used to have a job here and ended up in the House of Parliament. You can't believe it, can you?
So, yeah, one listens very carefully to all we get. And
is there a problem there, though, that, say, let's paint the picture. I've got a constituency. I'm getting a majority of my mailbag is saying we are against this, but I fervently believe for it and I vote. Am I letting my constituents down, or do I go with my constituents and I'm going against what my gut tells me?
So the national polls show there's a fairly significant majority in favour.
Right.
And so I think it's unlikely, but possible, particularly in certain constituencies, where there might be a strong, religious group, for example, so that might happen. But there'll be very few constituencies, I would think. But otherwise, I think, look, ultimately, it is a matter of personal conscience. And I hope that when it's debated for the first time, not the last time, when it's debated on Friday the 29th, I hope that it's done in a respectful, thoughtful, reflective manner. And let's see where it goes.
Really interesting, and good to get a view of an MP, because of course it's something that it needs to be talked about. It's
Absolutely.
something. My point, and you said it was misinformation, was that Starmer talked about how he was going to do this, and I hope it is being done more thoroughly than it was described earlier.
The other thing, I've heard some horrific stories of people dying in the most unbelievable agony, in a way that they knew would happen to them, but they could do nothing about it.
Yeah, and that has to be, and the woman earlier about her mother. You have to take that on board.